welcome to the Seasons of Justice podcast, where faith meets action and vision meets accountability. I'm Kevin Thompson, and today we'll be honoured to sit with a leader who is not only reshaping strategy, but reshaping what racial justice leadership can look like inside the church. But before we dive in, let me introduce our guest. Dawn Brathwaite is the newly appointed chair of the West Midlands Racial Justice Regional Board. She also serves on the Diocese of Birmingham's Racial Justice Board, is a former member of the Committee for Minority Ethnic Anglican Concerns, and currently serves on the Church of England's General Synod. A former solicitor and law firm partner, Dawn became the firm's first strategic lead for diversity, inclusion, and well-being. She now holds multiple governance roles, including NHS Non-Executive Director, and has received several awards for her equity and inclusion leadership. Dawn is a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and worships at St Boniface Church in Quinton, Birmingham. Dawn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Delighted to be here.
You're welcome. So our first question, at our recent racial justice retreat, you referenced a sermon at Black History Month evening song service by the Reverend Wayne Hamilton, who's actually the chair of the Birmingham Racial Justice Board. And this sermon was a powerful metaphor of distraction, recalibration, and completion. And it seemed to speak not only to the initiative, but to the church's wider journey with racial justice. And I just wanted to ask, where do you think the Church of England, especially in the West Midlands, is in that journey? And what does completion look like from your perspective?
Thanks, Kevin. So I definitely think we are in the season of recalibration. We must not risk distraction wherever we find ourselves, or whatever season we find ourselves in. So collaborating across the 6 dioceses in the West Midlands, and for the listeners, I will just name them. So that's Birmingham, Coventry, Gloucester, Hereford, Lichfield, and Worcester. We have set a clear path towards greater racial integration in our dioceses. We recognize the moral and biblical imperative if all of God's people are to feel safe, feel that they belong to a church where they can flourish, and that's whether they are lay or ordained, and that they are truly included in decisions that affect all of us. But coming back to the risk of distractions, those risks will always be around us, whether from within the church or from wider society. So from those that think the whole racial agenda and the resources allocated to it is an unwarranted distraction, that's one of the risks we face. And then you have those in society who view anything to do with inclusion, just the wider agenda of inclusion, as part of a woke agenda and woke culture. So I can't speak for the entire Church of England, but I am fairly confident that what we see in the West Midlands dioceses as part of this initiative is a fairly accurate representation on a micro scale of the wider church, pushing through the voices and actions of the naysayers as it recalibrates. And you've asked the question about what does completion look like? And I think there is something almost utopian in the use of that word. I would, however, look to a church that is more racially diverse across every grouping. So however you were to cut and slice the church, from the PCC, from the pews, up to the leadership, from leadership within our various dioceses, that what we are seeing is a greater representation of diversity. And particularly, if I were to use the Diocese of Birmingham, Birmingham is such a diverse city. It's just not reflected at the moment. So I hesitate to use the word completion, because I don't think the job is ever done or will be for a very long time. But we need to get to that stage where we can see real change embedded.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. And that flourishing that you spoke about earlier is really important in our work. I just wanted to ask, your role sits at the strategic level of the West Midlands Racial Justice Initiative, and yet many may not fully understand what the board does or how it differs from operational teams. So I just wanted to ask, how do you see the board's unique responsibility, and what is its role in pushing beyond optics into embedded, accountable transformation?
Thanks so much for this question. The West Midlands Racial Justice Board is comprised of 2 representatives from each of the 6 dioceses involved. This is a unique and what I call a transformational initiative. And I want to say at the outset that I'm very grateful to the board members for taking on this responsibility on top of everything else that they're doing. So the operational team for the initiative is led by a director, and they will have responsibility for the day-to-day management of the initiative and will be the ones seen interacting with the dioceses as they work to support each diocese with their respective projects. So that's the work of the operational team. The board, on the other hand, has governance oversight for the initiative. We have been awarded a significant amount of grant funding, and as you would expect, we have to be accountable for the spend and the delivery of the projects. So the board is updated by the director on budget, on spend, on the projects that we are continually undertaking. And the board is, as you would expect a board to be, will be asking the tough questions about what has the initiative accomplished to date? What is being planned? Is that what we told the funders we would be doing? Are the projects driving change in our dioceses, in our churches? And are the initiatives, are the projects sustainable? Sustainability is a big feature of this project. You know, this is not about simply doing things and then moving on to the next thing. We want change. We want to drive change long after this project is wrapped up. And so the board is asking those questions, and we are seeking assurance that things are happening, that if there are any particular challenges or concerns, that we have sight of them. And of course, as with every board, there will be some decisions that get referred up to the board because of their complexity, because of the amount of spend involved, or carry particular risk for the project. So we work collaboratively with the director to ensure that everything runs as smoothly as they can, that we anticipate where as a board we need to step in more quickly than at other times. So we don't sit apart from the operational team. We're not doing the day-to-day stuff, but we are holding, from a governance point of view, the project together. So I hope you find that a helpful description of what the board is doing versus the operational team.
Yes, most definitely. Thanks, Dawn. And that sustainability element is really important if change is to be achieved. So thank you. In the recent press release, you spoke of the 6 dioceses coming together intentionally to make sustainable change and to make UK minority ethnic / global majority voices seen and heard in all spaces. So I wanted to ask, from your vantage point, what are some of the common barriers across dioceses, and what examples of hope or progress are you seeing, even if they're imperfect?
Yes, because at this stage, you know, some of the projects would be in their early stages. So we're working across the 6 dioceses, as I've said. And these dioceses are indeed very different, from the likes of Birmingham on the one hand to Hereford by way of example. And so each diocese will have its own barriers or hurdles, and there are some common ones we're already seeing. And even if they are not across all six, we may be seeing some common themes, certainly across the majority of the diocese. So the first that I'm going to mention is resources, the lack of people resources. It's a case, as we say, the heart is willing, but in many places we are asking already busy people, whether they're lay or clergy, to step into this racial justice space on top of everything else that they're doing. Some dioceses now have a racial justice lead, but again, that individual may well be supported by volunteers. And in other dioceses, their racial justice network or board is led completely by volunteers. When I say volunteers, I mean individuals who have other roles and who have stepped in to lead this. So that is a common barrier, but that is where this initiative really comes into its own, because our team, this project, is working across the 6 dioceses and will help connect across the different pathways, ensuring that we're not reinventing the wheel in each of the 6 dioceses. They can help with sharing those resources, shaping the projects, upskilling individuals where needed. Yes, we have the barrier, but through this project, we have a solution to some of the barriers. So the second barrier that I want to mention is around the lack of data. So baseline data, as we found out, isn't there. It isn't there in a way that makes it helpful for us to know who are the UKME individuals, where are they found across the entire diocesan structure. And we need the data to know our benchmark, but also to measure eventually how effective projects have been. So it enables us to speak with authority when we talk about the lack of representation. It's not just there is a lack of representation, but we can't actually put any numbers to it. And then when we say, well, we think there has been long-term change, what does that mean in terms of data? So it is a barrier. It's one of the priority projects that is being tackled. But again, we're seeing some green shoots emerging, particularly in the Diocese of Birmingham, where efforts are being made to collect the data. And what I would say is sending out an email going, can you please complete this, is never going to get the desired result. So our data officer has been doing the rounds of meetings, the diocesan synod meeting, deanery meetings, wherever there are gatherings. She's been in attendance with the QR code explaining why data gathering is so important and asking individuals to complete the data questionnaire there and then. So that I offer as just one example that's happening in Birmingham that may well be replicated elsewhere, but whatever we do, the barrier around data is one that we really need to overcome quickly. And the third common theme barrier that I want to mention is around wider engagement and awareness of the project. And by that, I simply mean how many people understand what is happening, what are we trying to achieve, and buy in to the need for greater racial integration. And sometimes it's not, the big projects that will change people's mind. Sometimes it's just the smaller initiatives that are happening in our local churches. And so I want to talk about the microgrant scheme. So the microgrant scheme is a scheme whereby modest grants are given to applicants to support an initiative that has a racial justice theme around it. And we have seen quite a few grants now being awarded that are helping churches to promote intercultural events. And this is not only during Black History Month, this is, much wider than that. And we're very keen that these are not just one-off events. And so we need to be thinking at each time when an application is submitted or when the panel is thinking about whether to approve a request or not, to be thinking about how are these activities that are proposed changing the dial towards us being a more racially inclusive church, but also what does this mean in terms of sustainability? Is this a project that will be repeated year after year? Because we know a lot of times we need to constantly have these projects ongoing for people to understand really what does intercultural gathering and intercultural togetherness mean. So those are my 3 things, Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Thanks very much. So, next question. There was a West Midlands Racial Justice Retreat held recently, and at the retreat, you also offered a hard truth, and that was basically that this work, though bold and visionary, is often met with hesitation or resistance within the wider church. So I wanted to ask, how do you name and respond to that kind of institutional resistance? Not just outright opposition, but the subtler forms of silence and tokenism.
Thanks. So I'm going to start by saying that if racial inclusion was easy to achieve, we would not be having this conversation, nor indeed would there be a need for the West Midlands Racial Justice Initiative. We have to understand and accept that we are fighting years of racism embedded in our societies and communities, and that the church is just one such powerful structure where it is embedded. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't done so already to read From Lament to Action. It makes for sobering reading, and it shows how long and how embedded this problem is in all its guises. But at the same time, it lights a fire in us who are within the church from a racially minoritized background, that now is the time for change. It's the question of, if not now, then when? And at times, that fire may look like or feel like it's about to dim. And that's when we hit some of that institutional resistance, whether in the form of apathy, outright objection, a perception that there is a more pressing need elsewhere. You know that you've had your moment, racial justice folks. We've given you the limelight for so long, but we now need to move on to something else. Or sometimes that barrier or obstacle, it's just that the busyness of life that gets in the way of this agenda. But even with all of that, something is going to stoke that fire and give it new energy. So how do I respond? I respond with hope. I have to remain hopeful. I respond with an optimism like that fire that burns eternal. Because if not, we may as well just stop all of this work now. I just have to remain eternally optimistic that as God's people, we will understand the moral and the spiritual imperative in this place. We're talking about racial inclusion and racial justice. Sometimes I just say wider inclusion. We cannot have any form of exclusion in our church and call ourselves God's people.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. That was a very powerful reflection. Thank you. And also, at the retreat, you said something powerful as well, that we must persevere if we're going to see a transformed church where every individual, regardless of race or background, not only belongs but thrives. So I wanted to ask you, what does thriving look like for UKME, GMH clergy and laity? And how does the church shift from symbolic diversity to structural and spiritual equity?
That second part is a tough question. I'll do my best to respond to that. And yes, I firmly believe that we can't just exist, but we've got to thrive in this space. And thriving, it encapsulates so much. I plead a couple of questions ago. I spoke about the importance of data gathering, but thriving is much more than numbers. Data gathering is absolutely important. Thriving takes us into another dimension. Each parish, each oversight area, each diocese needs to be asking, some of these questions, and others could add a whole other list about questions. Do we know the giftings of our Black and Brown members? Have we asked them? Are we engaging with them? Are they integrated into every aspect of the life of the church? How are we worshipping? Are we worshipping in a manner that is inclusive? Or, and this is really important, are we welcoming in members who are of the UKME, GMH background, but expecting them simply to assimilate? This is how we do things. Come join us in our way. That's not thriving. Who sits and who represents where key decisions are taken? What does the top of the tree? What does that look like? That's what thriving is. Are we seeing greater representation at every level? Are we seeing change that includes us, rather than saying, come along, but you need to change to be like us? That's thriving. And I accept from all my work in diversity and inclusion in various sectors that change takes time, and diverse pipeline is not always there. Again, it comes back to that data point. It will show us where the gaps are. And where that pipeline isn't there, we have to be intentional in how we are going to fix that, how we are going to improve that situation. And we need processes, but those processes must be transparent and equitable. So, are there invisible or unspoken thresholds in place which lets through X numbers? Just sufficient to tick the box and keep on the right side of equity, but not too many, because we don't want to change that much. Those, for me, are some of the hard questions that the church must ask itself if members are racially minoritized group are going to thrive and not just exist.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. And that assimilation point that you mentioned earlier, that's something that does crop up quite a lot in conversation about how the church treated its UKME, GMH members. So thank you for that. Thank you. The initiative is rooted in faith, and you've spoken of prayer, of collective discernment, and of glorifying God through justice. So I just wanted to ask, how do you draw strength from your own spiritual practice, and how can theology serve as a tool for racial justice, not just for comfort?
Great question. So I say, whatever the season, for me, there'll be a scripture verse, a song, or a mantra. So when my family settled here from the Caribbean, we came with 2 young children. And, we're trying to get them into the system to understand the system whilst we are navigating the system ourselves. And we started just to see things happening that we were uncomfortable about. And so my husband would often recite the following to our young girls until they started saying it themselves. And he would say, equal to I, everyone. Better than I, no one. Greater than I, only one, God. And that encapsulates the great lesson on inclusivity. And as I've said, it's just one of those mantras that you pull on, those resources that you pull on whenever you start to feel that you're on kind of wobbly ground or feel a little bit unsettled, or we just needed to settle the girls a bit. So the scripture verse that I reached to from a very, very early age to this day has always been Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him and he will direct thy paths. And that's kept me going through thick and thin. Because again, it just reminds me, greater than I, only one, and that's God. And he's the one who guides my footsteps whilst I'm navigating this complex world with everything that's been thrown at me. So the second part of the question was about how can theology serve as a tool for racial justice, not just comfort? So I'm not a theologian. I'm not so sure I'm equipped to answer this, but I'm going to give it a go. And I'm going to say this. We often quote scripture. We quote Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, for you're all one in Christ Jesus. But the same theology also reminds us that faith without works is meaningless. So, a lot of people can quote all these scriptures, but at the end of the day, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. What actions are you taking? And what does that look like? And without wanting to get political, I also wanted to say this, that we need to be mindful of what we recognize as theology. And there are others who can espouse on this far more authority than I can. Because there is, to me, a growing evidence of what we regard as the bedrock of our theology being hijacked by those who want to roll back the racial justice agenda. There's a lot of movement, and at the moment if you blink, you probably miss it, of people going, I'm a Christian. I'm embracing this theology. But if you start really scratching beneath the surface of their beliefs, you will see the anti-racial justice agenda that is almost being planted there without people even recognizing. We see it with the flags, a matter of great concern. Yes?
Absolutely, yes.
But I think that's all. I'm going to leave that there because that's perhaps a discussion for another day. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity just to make that point about theology, how we're using it, but just be mindful of what things may not always be, what they seem.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you. And our final question for those of us listening, whether they're clergy or lay leaders or simply people of faith unsure where they fit into this work, can I ask, what's your invitation to them and how do they take the next faithful step?
Thanks, Kevin. So I'm going to start by saying that racial justice work is for everybody. It's for everyone. Yeah? So it's not just for those from a GMH UK ME background. So I want to use this question to comment on the role of allies, because I haven't spoken about allies during this conversation. So I've been blessed on this journey to have been held close, lifted up, comforted, encouraged. I've had doors opened by allies. Sometimes loudly in public spaces, and other times quietly in private spaces. So, to whoever who has made it this far in the podcast and is still listening, I want to say that we as GMH UK ME individuals can't fix all the problems in this area, and we shouldn't be expected to. Problems that we didn't create. So we need our big-hearted allies in this space alongside us. And that's whether they're lay, they're clergy, they're lay leaders, whoever they are. And if you are listening and you are a person of faith, unsure as to where you fit into this work, I'd encourage you to speak to someone. Ask who your racial justice lead is for your diocese, or contact us at the West Midlands Racial Justice Initiative. Use the resources available to understand what it means to be anti-racist. Speak with others and prayerfully take that first step. I'll conclude by saying that this initiative is about change. And change starts with that first step.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who are listening. You've been with us on Seasons of Justice. And may we all persevere, recalibrate, and co-create a church where liberation is no longer exceptional, but foundational.